this is the Grunig point, how the organisation deals with those issues depends on the situation it faces. So you're not going to go dealing with some other issue when it's a brake problem on your car. You'll deal with the brake problem and how will we address the brake problem. And the business will decide, oh, well, we'll recall the cars and fix the brakes. And the public with whom, or audience or market with whom we communicate depends on the situation as well. We're not going to try and communicate about our Toyota Land Cruisers to people who don't buy Land Cruisers, who buy sports cars. We want to talk to the people who buy Land Cruisers. And with all of the stuff you do in research about demographics, in marketing communication research about demographics, you get an idea of who the people are who buy Land Cruisers. I don't buy them, but you might buy them. So who are you? And they're the public or audience that we need to deal with. Hallahan says that a target public, and we can use target market, target audience here, is the group of people with whom an organisation wants to build a relationship. Maybe it's a business relationship, we want to sell products. Maybe it's an issue, a relationship over an issue, and we want to talk to people who share that issue with us. And it's important, therefore, to segment stakeholders into target publics, target audiences, or target markets in order to be able to build a relationship with them. And we'll do a little bit about that when we come to talk about target publics. Hallahan talks about issues being dynamic. That is, they're never static, they move. They change. And they change as you and I get engaged in the debate about them. And you can see that happening in a marketing sense. The car industry is probably another great example of that, where cars get more and more high-tech as BMW and Audi and Lexus bring in more and more clever toys for their cars. The other manufacturers start to follow. And issues emerge when people share problems, when an organisation shares problems with the people who are important to it. And that's why it's important for us, because we need to analyse, define, delimit and label problems which are beginning to emerge so that we know how we're going to be able, so that we're able to work out how we might address them. Hallahan, says that issues are really social constructs, points of difference. Heath and Palanchart talked about it, contestable points. So they're actually social constructs because you and I might take a different point of view about them. And they're not static. That was the point about issues being dynamic. They change. They change as we engage in debates about them. Issues management, the lifeblood of issues management, is this kind of debate and controversy about issues and collaborative decision making. Jim Grunig would like that thought of collaborative decision making because it resonates with his view of public relations, particularly being symmetrical. That is, you and I, if we're on two sides of an issue, you and I debate and have equal importance in the resolution of that issue. The critical scholars would say, no, it's not like that. Big organisations have more power than do individual people like you and me. But we're not being critical scholars today. Issues management is the result of arguments that happen in society and that actually shape the way society operates, if you like. And you think about issues that happen about, let's say, the way where a road's is proposed to go. And a local community says, hey, we don't want you to put a road through here because that might upset our farming land. And so that the people who are going to build the road change their mind because we have a dialogue about it, we may have an issue debate about it. And so the preferences of society are reflected in the way in which that issue is resolved. And usually, issue dynamics are about different facts or trying to clarify what the facts are of an issue, people's values and what the policy might be related to that. And the reason issues are dynamic is because different people advocate different positions about an issue. And this is not just debates between a company and activists, say. Heath and Palanchar tell us that some of the biggest fights about issues actually happen inside organisations, when executives and communicators like us are trying to work out what's our position on that issue that's emerging or that's happening now. And these guys say that the big debates often are the ones that happen inside when we're trying to work out how we're going to address that issue and what our particular policy is going to be on that policy. And our views about an issue are based on how we feel about it, our altruistic interest, whether or not we want to donate. We think it's important to always donate to a charity. Gen Y is very altruistic, always wants to support good causes. And they say that how we feel about an issue comes from that kind of approach towards it, that kind of life frame, if you like. And they argue that strategic issue management is a struggle for owning in the news media and in other communication values. Think about that in a marketing communication context. The issue is selling more products. We need to own the space. We need to dominate the media about that. And often we pay to dominate that space with an advertisement, for example, or some kind of direct selling. We need to get ahead of the competitor. And it's the same point that Heath and Palanchar here are making about strategic issues communication or strategic issue management. We have to struggle to own the space. And how an issue is resolved, and in what communication context, depends on how the issue survives in our society. So if our organisation is worried about environmental things, again, but society doesn't really care about that, the issue will die away. And if you were with me on Friday, I showed you a slide based on some research that I did related to senior Australian communicators and the issues that they use to determine whether or not the issues that influence them in their strategic communication decisions. And they think about a whole lot of things, but they rate issues related to the natural environment last. You know, Gen Y students think that the environment is a really, really important issue, but some of these hard-nosed communicators do not. And that's the point there. How does an issue survive in society itself? And how an issue is resolved, how well you can sell your product, can never be separated from how your product is being discussed within the broader community. So let's think about issue dynamics, how issues change, and the situation we're facing, because they're linked. I'm not going to talk about structuration theory, but one way of explaining that little graphic is to use Anthony Giddens' structuration theory. Giddens argues that people actively shape the world we live in, just as the world we live in shapes us. So we're a product of our environment, we're a product of our family, we're a product of the society we live in. But we also shape our family, we also shape the society that we live in. And if you think about that, that's a way in which an issue changes, the way an issue grows changes the situation that we're addressing. The situation that we address means here's the issues that are related to it. That's all that's about. So let's think about an organisation and the world around it. Let's think about its external environments and the issues that it might face. First of all, in the market environment, the organisation is worried about its customers, its competitors, and its suppliers, and market forces. They're the things that drive marketing communication, being concerned about those things. What do our customers want? What do they think of our product? Why aren't they buying it? Why are they buying it? What are our competitors doing? Can we get cheaper resources from our suppliers? Can we get more for the same price? In the non-market environment, we're worried about things like this. What the regulators are up to, what the activists are pushing. What's the government saying its policy about this should be, or what tax rates should happen? What's the media, what's the mass media reporting about these issues? And CSR means corporate social responsibility, that is, organisations being good citizens. And so examples of what's happening in the non-market environment, is there other regulations changing? Will there be, in my country, will there be a change of government? That's important because policies are different. What are activists up to? And what's the media doing? How's the media covering all of that? And we need to think about the organisation and why these issues are important to it, for its business, for its ability to compete, for its ability to get resources in order to build the products that it sells. And can it change its environment in some way? Can it influence the environment in which it works in some way? And we need to write down that these issues are important to the organisation because. What's the consequences? Now in marketing communication and in public relations and in advertising, we're always thinking about organisational stakeholders. But it's really important for us to segment stakeholders, much like an orange, into publics or markets or audiences. Get more specific, because, go back to selling cars, not everybody wants to own a sports car. Not everybody wants to own a sedan car. Not everybody wants to own an off-road vehicle. There's 3 different target markets for cars that Toyota produce, for example. So segment them according to the situation. So an organisation's stakeholders generally could be set up like this. Those that provide an input, it's shareholders, for example. Banks, employees. Those who receive an output, customers, employees. Governments are a stakeholder because they get tax from when we make a profit. Hopefully we always make a profit. The local community, because we're investing in the local community, and our employees will go and buy their food, say, from the local community. The shareholders, they get a dividend every year. The utilities that are also services that provide power, water, transport, they get paid, so they get an output from the organisation. The people who service an organisation are those utilities, their suppliers, and perhaps even the industry group to which our organisation belongs. And the people who govern our organisation are those who determine the regulations, the laws by which we operate, that the government decides. So we can start to look at organisational stakeholders in that way. But we need to segment them. And given a situation, stakeholders become target publics or target audiences. And which one of those stakeholders we deal with depends on the situation we're facing. Sports car owners if we're trying to sell Mustang sports cars, for example. Ron Smith, the American, says that target publics, target audiences, target markets are like your family. You don't choose them. They're just there. They belong. They could, like your kid brother, or sometimes your kid sister, they could be helpful or they could be annoying. But they exist because of their interaction and interdependency with the organisation. And here's the point about organisations and their publics, markets, audiences facing common issues. In a marketing communication sense, we produce fountain pens. An issue that we face from a marketing communication point on fountain pens is that we produce them, you want to buy them. There's a common issue. Fountain pen is the issue. We produce them, you want to buy it, How do I get one? And so we can start thinking about target publics and target audiences in the context of primary and secondary. I'm going to talk publics here because I'm more comfortable with talking publics. So on a specific issue, who are the primary and secondary publics that we should be interested in? Well, primary publics are those people who are directly affected by the issue. Secondary publics are those who are indirectly affected by the issue but can influence primary publics. Let's put that in a university context. You want to go, when you leave high school, to Rangsit University. Mum and Dad want you to go to another university. Mum and Dad can influence you because they might have to pay the fees. You might have wanted to come to Australia to go to university, and Mum and Dad said, no, you're not going to Australia to go to university, it's too expensive. We're going to send you to Rangsit because you'll get just as good an education at Rangsit, and we can afford to keep you at Rangsit. Mum and Dad have influenced you. And that's a metaphor for what the role of secondary publics. And if you're dealing in a public relations sense, we're also concerned about tertiary publics, which are also known as intervening publics. And so what are they? They're the people who can influence, they're not directly affected by this, but they can influence both primary publics and secondary publics. And in a PR sense, and perhaps in a marketing communication sense, the media is always an intervening public. When I say media here, I mean journalists. And let me give you an example of that. Let me take an environmental issue. I'm fond of talking about environmental issues because students are generally concerned about the natural environment. And so it's a nice issue to talk about. So on an environmental issue, and if we take the view that intervening or tertiary publics are the people who can help us send a message, let's think about journalists. So this is how specific we can get. On this environmental issue, we want to talk to environmental reporters who work for radio current affairs, for television, press, blogs, have social media, other social media things, internet news sites, trade, industry and specialist publications, environmental publications. Immediately we've started to break down which media we're talking about. Then there are political reporters. They're the people who are on radio talkback or report politics on television and the press. Then there's a particular industry correspondent where we make motor cars and we've got an environmental issue. We want to talk to environmental reporters, but we also want to talk to the automotive reporter of the national newspaper, for example. And then there's a whole lot of other people. So it's important to segment not only stakeholders into target publics, markets or audiences, but when you come to talking about the news media as a tertiary public, which news media are you talking about? I want to talk to you about why the general public doesn't work as a target market or a target audience. The great general public. The general public is every single person who lives in Thailand right now, from the baby who was just born to the person who's just passed away. Are they all really